So as I said, my name is Maria. I'll be moderating today's session, and I have the pleasure of welcoming five speakers with us today. First up is Taylor Campbell. She's the Open Science Project Lead for Creative Commons. She'll be followed by a presentation from Catherine Hughes, who's the Open Science Information Specialist at AMBL. Next, we will hear from Melissa Harrison, team leader for Europe PMC, also based at AMBL EBI. And then a joint portion from Monica Granados, the director of Open Science at Creative Commons, and Kat Walsh, the copyright counsel at Creative Commons, before we move on to the Q&A. So to start, I hand over to you, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Maria. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Taylor Campbell, and I am here with Creative Commons to speak to you specifically about the Creative Commons licenses and how they relate to today's conversation of what Creative Commons licenses mean for research and AI. So can I please advance to the next slide? Yes. So just a little bit of background about Creative Commons, a very small bit of background about Creative Commons. We are an international nonprofit organization, and we're founded in 2001. We're dedicated to building a world where education, culture, and science are equitably shared as a means to benefit humanity. Even if you haven't heard that particular statement before, you've probably heard of Creative Commons in the context of our licenses. We've been doing copyright licenses for open access and sharing education, culture, and science resources, art, photos, images since 2001, when the internet was really taking off. And so Creative Commons licenses have become a household name. They've become a common tool for making sure that these resources and these creative works are able to be shared as equitably as possible. And we're excited that we're thinking about how that applies to science research now. Next slide, please. So when we think about open licensing for science research, we're thinking about two main points that we want you to be able to take away at the end of this webinar. The first is that open licensing increases the impact of your research. It increases the impact of your research because it allows more people to be able to benefit from your research. And globally, Creative Commons licenses are intended to be used internationally, universally. And so our lovely team has done a great job of making information available, not just specific to certain jurisdictions, but relevant around the world. The second is, sorry, go back for one more second. It's okay. The second main point is that you remain the copyright holder of your research. And that means that you can choose your preferred license. This is a little less commonly known, but as the creator of your research, as the creator of your piece of knowledge, you remain the copyright holder. There are some exceptions to this, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later with Kat, but sometimes when you create research on behalf of an institution or a government or public dollars, funded by public dollars, the copyright does not remain with you. Sometimes the copyright is technically or legally owned by your sponsor or your host institution or things like that. But in general, you remain the copyright holder and you have the choice to give that copyright over in those cases. And so because you remain the copyright holder, you have a lot of agency when it comes to choosing the license that you put on your open research. And so we want to make sure that you have an understanding of how licenses work so that you can make that choice when the time comes. Next slide, please. So for today's webinar, we're going to be addressing some specific questions in the context of the topic. Some of the questions that we're going to be exploring today include, what should I know about fair dealing in the context of AI? If I publish my research with an open license, do I still retain copyright? And how does open licensing affect whether my research can be used to train generative AI? These questions and more are questions that we at Creative Commons are delighted to address and to speak with you about on an ongoing basis. And we hope that our attendance at today's webinar is just the beginning of conversations around how this can be done. We also want to invite you to ask more questions if you have them. It's not a problem. We're here during this webinar to speak through all of these questions and more. So if you have other questions that you'd like to raise as we go along, please feel free to do so in the chat. And we will also have a portion at the end of today's webinar to address questions openly, as well as an invitation to another space where you can always come and ask questions of the Creative Commons team. Before we go on, I will also want to just say that because licensing and copyright has always been an important aspect of publishing research, this is something that we're going to be thinking about all the time. We're always available to have these conversations as you as researchers navigate your options and also as institutions navigate how those options are made available to researchers. So yeah, next slide, please. We're going to get into the licenses themselves. Our licenses offer a standardized way for research authors to grant others permission to use your work under clearly defined terms. We are using our Creative Commons licenses with a combination of the following 4 term options. And so I'm just going to talk through each of them and give you an idea of how they each work, as well as the differences between the different licenses. So the first license term is attribution, which is nicknamed by. And this specific term option dictates that credit must be given to you, the creator. We use the shorthand by because it basically signals that this work was created by you, the author, or the creator. And so if someone uses your research and your research is under a CC BY license, that means that they can reuse your research as long as they provide attribution to you. Most research funders recommend or require a CC BY license for open access publications. And CC BY is the least restrictive license. As you can see on the right-hand side here, it's at the top of the license, ordering the licenses by those that provide the most freedom all the way down to those that provide the least freedom of access. So CC BY is our most free and least restrictive license. The second term option that we have available is the share alike, which is abbreviated SA. And with a share alike term, adaptations of your research must be shared under the same terms. So with that, if you produce your research and you use a share alike license on your research, that means that anyone who uses your research must also license their adaptations under a share alike license. We combine the attribution term with the other terms to make our licenses. So all of our licenses do require attribution. You'll see that on the right-hand side. They all have the little person icon with by, and then they're combined with other terms to make up the licenses. So the share alike licenses is a combination of attribution and share alike. The third is non-commercial, which dictates that only non-commercial use of your work is permitted. And it's not primarily intended for monetary compensation. That one also can be combined with the share alike terms or the standard attribution term. And then our fourth term option is no derivatives, which is abbreviated with ND. And the no derivatives term dictates that there can be no derivatives or adaptations of your research at all. So if you create research, if you publish research that starts to explore a specific idea or a specific topic, and someone takes your research and wants to build on it, it is not recommended that you use a no derivatives license because they would effectively be unable to do so without having to go do a lot of other things. If you notice again on the right-hand side, our no derivatives licenses are provide the least freedom. They're the most restrictive, and that's why they're at the bottom of the list here. As we go forward, we're going to pass it back to the EMBL team, and you'll learn a little bit more about how open science policy is happening within EMBL. And then Monica and Kat from the Creative Commons team will dig into the ways that these Creative Commons licenses actually come to play when we think about more complicated topics like training on generative AI, publishing, sharing, and things like that. So quick overview. This is a very common slide for us if you'd like to take a screenshot and reference it later. We also have it available on our website. But we will stop there, and I will pass it over to Catherine to talk about EMBL.
Thanks. So I'm Katie. As Maria said, I'm the Open Science Information Specialist at EMBL, and so I oversee a lot of the open access publishing and the open science policy. And next slide. Just to say that EMBL, if you're not already aware, is the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, and it is Europe's only intergovernmental laboratory for life science research. And we have 5 services that we focus on, but the 2 I was going to highlight were the advanced training and the scientific services, both of which are openly available online as an sort of focus on our adherence and our commitment to open science. And we have over 100 million daily web requests to our data services, including our literature database, which I'll let Melissa talk more about in a little bit. Next slide. So we have over 2,000 staff located at 6 sites across 5 countries in Europe, and which makes for a really interesting research culture. In the UK, for instance, we're quite used to having open access or open science mandated at a national level, whereas in Germany, that's seen as an impingement on academic freedom. And so they have so they don't have mandates, but different requirements. So navigating those areas are interesting. Next slide. So open science at EMBL, we've been quite fortunate. So our last Director General, who's just recently left, was quite committed to open science and transparency. And in 2019, began a project to implement an open science policy, which was established in 2021. It's recently been updated as of 9 days ago, so quite exciting. And if you go to the next slide, our open science policy is pretty standard. We, of course, require a deposit of preprint. The bits that are highlighted in red are actually the parts that have changed as of 9 days ago. So while we've always mandated a CC-BY license, we now require it on any version that's made open access. So be it the published version or the author accepted manuscript. And then we also deposit, so Europe PMC is used as EMBL's institutional repository as well. And so we used to allow a 6-month embargo, and now we are immediately deposited upon publication, bringing us into alignment with the coalition S funders like Wellcome Trust, ERC, and UKRI. And to do this and help implement this policy change, we have established a institutional rights retention strategy, which in the UK is quite, I would say, is now quite common. In the rest of Europe, this is a sort of a new development. And so the next slide. So just to show you the impact of our open access policy on our publications. So as I said, our first open access policy our open science policy was established in 2021, and we have seen an increase in publishing gold open access in both hybrid journals and fully open access journals, which is also helped by the fact that we do have a central article processing charge fund. And so we would love to get rid of that little pink and orange bit at the top and get 100% compliance. We aren't quite there yet. Our open data and our open software do much better. We're actually 100% compliant in open data. So we just need to get rid of that 13%. Next slide, please. We've also seen an increase in using the Creative Commons licenses, most specifically CC BY, which is positive. This is a little bit of a quick and dirty, and all of these figures, I should say, are made by my colleague Victoria. And so again, we would love to get rid of the pink bit at the top, but I think we've done quite well over time. Next slide. So I just thought I would bring up two examples of where our researchers have picked more restrictive, less flexible licenses and how that has impacted them. So before our policy was implemented, researchers did publish behind a paywall. And we had one recently where some authors published an article and wanted to reuse their figures for a future publication and realized that they didn't actually have the right to do that. So they had to go to the publisher to see what it would cost. It did cost quite a bit of money to reuse those figures, and even more so because they wanted to crop them, so make a derivative of them, and that actually caused more confusion with the publisher. So there are times when it is quite difficult and you publish in a all rights reserved article. And then the next slide. And this example actually happened at another institution that I worked at. It was not with Wiley, but it had the same policy as Wiley, where an author was adamant that they wanted to publish a non-commercial, but that they wanted to have the control over the commercial use of the paper. And when they read the copyright or the licensing agreement or copyright transfer agreement with the publisher, it was clear that the publisher actually had the commercial control over that paper. And while we did try to negotiate with that publisher, we were unsuccessful. So it left the author in a really awkward position of deciding whether to retract the article and take it somewhere else, or continue to publish but not have that commercial right over it. So basically, they would have ceded all decisions about how their work was used, when or if they could pursue legal action for misuse of their work, and crucially, if they would also not get to decide how their paper was used in a commercial sense, and else the publisher would have been the sole beneficiary. So those are just a few examples of what happens when you also try to pick a more restrictive license. So I'll pass on to Melissa now.
Thanks, Katie.
Hi there. So I'm here to talk about some of the kind of positive aspects of CC BY licenses. So if I can have the next slide, please. So just an introduction. So Europe PMC is a free repository of life science research. There's 45 million abstracts available, and then we have about 10 million full text publications. So we partner with PubMed Central, and we link to other research outputs. And there are 1 million users of the website, as well as API requests. So next slide, please. So Europe PMC is funded by 35 different funders, and basically, we provide them with an open access repository to support their open access policies. And of those, 22 of the Europe PMC funders actually require a CC BY license for all their publications. So they're actually kind of really mandating the needs for this. If we can go to the next slide. So I just want to, this slide I find really helpful. So as I mentioned before, there's 46.2 million records. So that's all the things that we have in abstracts that we may be linking to free full text available elsewhere. And then we have 10.8 million articles within Europe PMC that are free to read. So they're full text, fully searchable, but you can only read them and we can only display them. So then as we get narrower, we've got 7 million articles in the open access full text subset, and those are available for download and reuse. And they're all under a Creative Commons or a similar license. But if you kind of narrow it even further, any that full text and available for derivative or commercial use, so those that are kind of taken out that can be reused for in lots more ways. And just to give an example of that top section, so Europe PMC, we text and data mine for a lot of bioentities, for instance, and we make those available in the API for via other ways for users. And this is really important for the community to be able to understand what's going on in the articles. Now, where there is a more restrictive license, we can't actually provide the context of that annotation in the API. So it's just, here's what we found, where there's no context available. So it kind of really limits the use for people using our annotations. So next slide, please. So I've got 3 examples here that I wanted to run through. And these are all based on databases that are based at EMBL EBI. So PRIDE is a proteomics database for large-scale protein studies. So it's the proteins and their cellular activities, and scientists share, discover, and reanalyze data from various experiments. Now, the PRIDE team have this data in their database, but what they're using Europe PMC for, and they're using the Europe PMC APIs to access the full text that they're allowed to access. And what they're doing is they've developed some models that are able to detect where other data is mentioned around the same place as the data that they have, and that it's of relevance. So it's not just any accession number mentioned in the same article, it's actually detecting this piece of data that's in a different database is of relevance to this. And then they're making that link in their database. So this enables their users to be able to actually get a wider context. So when they're looking for a piece of data in PRIDE, they've got these links to other data sets. So it really helps with the understanding and the kind of extra knowledge that this can garner to users. So my second example, if we can move the slide, thank you, is PFAM. So PFAM, it's a database of protein domain families. Now, I don't want to get into the details of this, but basically proteins have functional subunits that are called domains. And these are all pretty common, like you can have common domains across different proteins. And if you know the DNA sequence of a domain and you know what its function is in a really commonly studied protein, you can extrapolate out for other proteins that are maybe less well studied. So the PFAM team, what they're doing is they're using the Europe PMC API to find the full text, and then they're finding snippets that describe the protein domain within the text. And then they're using that to provide a summary of the protein family. And so this helps users of this database to predict functions and identify potential drug targets from that. So my final use case is the identification of drug targets. So Open Targets is a pre-competitive platform that is developed in collaboration with pharmaceutical industry and EMBL EBI, and it's an open source platform. And what it's doing is helping for the identification and prioritization of drug targets. And so what they're doing there is in collaboration with people in the Europe PMC team, we're using the full text and data mining out for genes, drugs, diseases that we found using machine learning models, and then also associations. So when there are relationships between these entities. And then this information is then hosted, delivered to the Open Targets platform, where it's added in with lots of other data and information from other databases, which is creating a body of evidence for drug development selection, which really speeds up the process for clinical trials and basically kind of drug development overall. So they're my examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Now over to the licensing and AI section.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm Monica Granados, and my colleague Kat Walsh will follow me. So I'm here to talk about CC BY. I think you've already heard some great examples from Melissa as to why, and so I hope at the end of this webinar, you'll have a full understanding of why this is the recommended license and why it forms many parts of the requirements and mandates for different funders across the world. So we've created a couple of resources. Here is one example, really to give you that background information. You have the option of a spectrum of licenses. They were created to give you options. And the asterisk to all of this will always be CC BY makes sense in almost all cases when we're talking about research, but there will always be exceptions to that rule. I think it was mentioned by Katie as well. There will be some instances of privacy, some instances of security concerns, instances of protected data. But here we're sort of just talking more in generalities. Most of the people here on the call will be working with data that can and should be shared, publications that can and should be shared with a CC BY license. So to give you some more information, we've created this particular resource. It's accessible on Zenodo. The link is there, and my colleague Eleanor is going to drop the link to that. And so it's a general resource. When you have questions about what license should I use, this is something great to turn to, and it's available in multiple languages on our Zenodo community. So going a little bit deeper into why use the CC BY license on the next slide. The CC BY license, as Taylor mentioned, is really aligned with the norms of sharing in research in science, regardless of what discipline you are in. You stand on the shoulder of giants. You are building on the foundation of the research that came before you, and you honor that with a citation. It's really the same case with a CC BY license. With the CC BY license, as long as you give attribution to the original author, anyone can then share and adapt that work. And I argue that I really think that is the conceit of research. It's the idea that you put something out there for others to read and then to build on top of that. And you want to give people the permission to be able to do that most effectively in the most number of mediums as possible. It's our least restrictive license, meaning that it also downstream will have the most applications, the most degrees of freedom, the greatest ability to maximize the sharing and potential of your research output, whether that's a publication, whether that's a preprint, whether that's a data set, whether that is a scientific diagram. And some really specific examples of that on what you can enable with a CC BY license is on our next slide. So when you publish something, for example, with a CC BY license, as was mentioned in the policies, again, that are pretty consistent across the world, others can do things like translate your work into other languages. A more restrictive license won't allow that. It can be adapted to educational materials and tools. So actually someone can take your preprint, your publication, and then take the material that's in the text itself and create a video about your work. It can also then be used on Wikipedia if you've got an image in your publication and the publication is CC BY licensed. You can take that image and upload it into Wikipedia. You're working on maybe a rare disease and you've got a pathway there that you've published on and you want to add that to Wikipedia, you can do that because that's the type of license that's required for an open platform like Wikipedia. So I hope I've made the case I and my colleagues here have made the case for a CC BY license. I know a question that has come up a lot now in the age of AI is how do these licenses intersect or don't intersect with AI? So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kat Walsh, who will talk about that intersection.
Great, thanks, Monica. And we could go to the next slide. We have a link to a one-page a little one-page resource on how CC BY impacts generative AI training, which is probably the most popular question we've been asked in the past year or two. And This is basically an abbreviated version of what's in our longer FAQ. And Eleanor, if you could maybe link the FAQ on AI, which has a little bit more detail in the chat. But if you want like a brief summary of the issues that come up and how CC licenses interact, this is our little resource, and I'll talk about them over the next few slides. But if you don't want to have to take notes, here it is. And I'll give a little bit of, a little bit of the legal disclaimer, since I am, I always have to start with the disclaimer. I am a lawyer. I am a US-based lawyer, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the EU context, but I do entirely practice in the US, so I've depended a lot on our international community and the global network for some of the things I'm going to say about the EU in particular. And none of this is legal advice. I'm going to talk about the principles behind how the licenses interact, but what you should do in your own specific situation, you'll probably have to rely on your own institutional counsel or somebody that you have a relationship with, but I'll try and clarify the principles and the things you might consider as well as possible. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about using CC licenses for AI training. We do think that AI tools should be trained on research. Most of what we do at Creative Commons is try to basically enable public access to resources and provide the legal infrastructure for people to have access to resources in the public interest. And we know now that a lot of people are using AI tools as a search engine, as a source of information. And whether that excites you or terrifies you, like we know that that's where people are going for information. And many of these AI tools have already been trained on publicly available open access research. And if this is where people are going for their information, we hope that like true and rigorous research is going to be in those training corpuses and not just simply garbage and misinformation. Open access research has been such a boon to the public in enabling the public to get access to like true rigorous scientific information. And we hope that if people are using AI tools, that those AI tools also have access to that information. Whether or not this is delightful or terrifying to you, but it will have more, your research will have more impact if it is available to those AI tools. And also, if we go to the next slide. There are, so as mentioned previously, there are a number of CC licenses. CC BY is generally the standard that we recommend for scientific publishing because it does enable so many more uses. It enables remixes, it enables textbooks, it enables Wikipedia, it enables like translation of resources, like repurposing of figures, things like that. But we do have many more restrictive licenses. The most restrictive is the non-commercial no derivatives license, which a lot of people have brought up and wondered, like, oh, I don't want AI training on my works. Like, should this be the license that I use? And we have not recommended that. And I'll get to that a little bit in the following slides. So for the next slide. In general, we don't believe that restrictive licenses actually have that effect that people are hoping to get. That we don't think that using a restrictive CC license will protect from AI training. In particular, the US has had several cases recently that have deemed AI training to be fair use, which means that like no license is required. It doesn't matter what license the material is under. This falls under an exceptions and limitations to copyright. To the best of our knowledge, we do think that training AI falls under the text and data mining exceptions in many EU jurisdictions. There is a possibility to opt out in the EU. The AI Act provides an opportunity to opt out of AI training if you have a machine readable statement that prevents, for example, AI crawlers or things like that to do that. But this is not a function of the copyright license. You can put this on any licensed material, but it's not because of the copyright of the material. It's because of that specific carve-out exception. That still doesn't prevent things that would fall under like exceptions that allow for non-commercial scientific research, things like that. And there's been a little bit of litigation over that has preserved that exception. But using the restrictive license is not the thing that will stop that training. So if we go to the next slide. AI tools can access copyrighted works. So this means even all rights reserved works where there is no open access provision at all. AI tools are training on these works. They're relying on limitations and exceptions to copyright, such as fair use, fair dealing, the text and data mining exception. The Creative Commons licenses are going to enable open access and research, but they're not going to but using a restrictive license is not actually going to stop things that fall under limitations and exceptions. We go to the next slide. So even the CC BY and NCND license, the non-commercial no derivatives, which is the most restrictive one that we offer, doesn't stop AI. And you might ask, why does Creative Commons offer this license if it doesn't do that? And CC licenses are useful for all kinds of copyrighted material, not just scientific research, but also like artistic works, like music, books, things like that. It was meant to be pretty general purpose for any kind of copyrightable material. So often this license gets called the file trading license, and it got used particularly by a lot of like musicians and artists who want their material to be able to be on like file trading, but they rely on a commercial revenue stream, or otherwise they're concerned about their existing artistic market. So the CC BY NCND license is sort of like a gateway to like, okay, like you can let people share this the way that they used to share mixtapes, for example, but not really have open access to the work. For things where some of those concerns don't come into play, particularly for like, say, grant-funded or publicly funded research, things like that, where you're not dependent on a revenue stream, where you want like the information to be widely disseminated, we do encourage CC BY, and we encourage things other than copyright to be used to control other uses, such, for example, academic norms, which still apply regardless of copyright. Things like good citation practices. Privacy restrictions might still come into play. Regulatory restrictions might still come into play. These are things that would affect the use of the work that are not copyright, which in the US in particular is seen as an economic right. And I know the EU has a little bit more of a the moral rights sense of it, but still in general, copyright is not the best tool for this. But using restrictive copyright does prohibit a lot of the uses that we do want to see, such as like translations or adaptations. It prevents that work from being used for its best purpose to enable more research to be built on top of it. So we recommend that platforms don't default on that and look into other solutions for uses that might be concerned about or might want to restrict. I think with that, that's the end of my section, and we're going to head on to the open questions.
Thank you so much. I think all of our speakers, before we move on, I also just want to briefly say that although we'll aim to cover all the questions today, there may be more than we can answer. Helpfully, Creative Commons hosts legal office hours, and there's a link that I believe someone will drop in the chat to join that. But I'll stop sharing now, and we can move to the question portion of this discussion. So without further ado, I will first go through a couple of questions that we've received prior to the webinar, and one of them was around restrictions applied through the non-commercial license. What does it actually restrict? For example, does it restrict teaching or training materials that are used for page training versus just used within a commercial entity?
Yeah, so I'll jump in that one. So in this one, I'd say like any commercial use that you would not be able to make for an all rights reserved work, you would not be able to make for a CC BY NC licensed work. So for example, if your use fell under a limitation or exception, like if you would be able to teach using that material, or like, quote excerpts, for example, under a limitation or exception, such as fair use or fair dealing or something like that, you'd be able to use it for with a non-commercial licensed work. But if you would not be able to do that with an all rights reserved work, you would also not be able to make that commercial use with a non-commercial licensed work. So for example, you might not be able to use an NC licensed work as part of like a paid course, like where somebody had to pay to access that material. You could or you could you could have people pay to you would not be able to charge people particularly to access that material. It's a little questionable as to like when you can use that in an educational context. For example, if you work for a for-profit university, like can you use it? It's a little bit of a gray area, like some of that's usually been allowed. If you run like a paid tutoring service or a paid consulting service, usually a bit more questionable. A lot of this is not very clear. The wording in the license talks for primarily for like economic advantage, for example. I'd say be conservative in your use of non-commercial licensed materials if you want to rely on them. Be sure that your use is non-commercial, and if you are not sure about your use being non-commercial, I'd either ask the author for a separate license or try to find a resource that is available for commercial usage. It is a little bit unclear, but I generally default to materials that are licensed to be used commercially. This is part of why we encourage people to license their works for commercial use if they're not depending on a revenue stream, because there are a lot of, for example, educational and public interest contexts where there is a financial stream involved and it can be a little bit unclear.
Thank you, Kat. All right. For our next question, we've had a request to talk a little bit about books and whether there are any sort of specific distinctions that are applicable to books when compared to other research publications or preprints. Anyone from the speakers feel?
I'll say from a licensing context, there's not a lot of difference between books and other types of material for what we recommend and like how the licensing applies. It's just a book may as well be an extra long article for that context, but I'll let somebody else jump in for other practical considerations.
Yeah, I guess for when we were doing it at the university, especially when the UKRI requirement came in, a lot of things that so CC BY isn't required. Of course, it's recommended and encouraged, but they do allow more restrictive licenses for books. And the other issue that we found that was a bigger issue in books rather than articles is the third-party copyrighted material. So being aware that while your book might be licensed under CC BY, there's material in that book that might have a different license. And I think that was the biggest challenge we saw with open access books. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Thanks, Katie. We also had a question around attribution. What attribution are CC BY licenses supposed to get from AI training on them? And do they get that attribution in practice?
Yeah. So as I talked about a little in my section, a lot of the training that's happening is happening under the justification of a limitation or exception to copyright. So those are not depending on the CC licenses. The CC licenses don't override exceptions and limitations. So in those cases, we don't believe that they'd be legally required to provide attribution if they are relying on an exception or limitation. That said, we do encourage people to provide attribution where possible, and I know that in many AI contexts that it's not possible because of the way that the material is being trained on and being incorporated into a model, like identifying the source is not possible. But where it is possible to give attribution, we do encourage people to do that, but often we don't think that it's legally required.
I would just
perhaps that's a good place for us to just mention a new initiative that we are looking for feedback on. So because we get this question a lot, right? We're like, as it stands, as Kat very clearly explained, it is falling under copyright exception, but that isn't consistent with the sharing norms of science, and we're concerned that what is happening is that there might actually be some pushback and enclosure of research outputs because they're concerned that it's going to be used for training and not given that attribution because of the way that models are currently being constructed. That doesn't mean that that is impossible, right? There is ways to build models where you do keep the attribution. The RAG models are sort of a subsample of that. So I'm going to link to our CC Signals initiative. We just launched it last week or 2 weeks ago. It's open for feedback right now. And basically the idea is we recognize that this is an issue. Is there a way for us to sort of be a broker between content holders and AI models where the declaring party requires or solicits one of the signals, one of them being credit or attribution. So I wanted to take an opportunity to mention that that's some work that we're doing, recognizing that this is a question that comes up often.
And I just wanted to add on to that as well, that really in the kind of whole remit of open science, where researchers are creating models and they are using open data, those the training models as well as the data sets that they were generated from can be made open. So that's what we do within the Europe PMC team. So the example I used for open targets, the models as well as the training data are all made available for people to see. So it's not necessarily attribution, but it is that what the models were trained on is obvious and available to people.
Thank you. We've had some questions in the chat, and please, if you do have a question, pop it there or raise your hand if you prefer to ask it yourself. There was a question from Fiona that asked if all material with a CC license can be used by AI regardless. What's the point of using a CC license for publications? And I think, Melissa, perhaps you can kind of speak from the perspective of, trying to use publications for things like text mining and how the license is actually helpful / mandatory for that.
Yeah, so like I mean on the slides when I showed you that the pyramid of what things can be done, and it is in that open access subset, that's the area that we can work within. So the models and the examples that I provided of the other databases here, which are all openly available data that can be reused by the community and really supports scientific integrity. All of that, they can't use the other just free to read content. So that's the kind of thing, is that like maybe, and also like our academic institutions getting access to content that's behind a paywall. I mean, the AI companies may be able to pay publishers for licensing rights for this, but the academics that are using the Europe PMC open access subset, which is all combined in one place, which makes it a lot more easier, they can only have access to that.
Thanks, Melissa. Any other additions to that point? We've got a question around what happens when people do not attribute to the CC BY content, and in terms of kind of reusing material directly, not necessarily in an AI context. Does it help to provide suggested attribution forms? Is the license meaningless if we can't defend it?
Yeah. So just as with all rights reserved content, if somebody uses your CC BY content in a way that is not complying with the terms and conditions, that is a copyright infringement, and you would be able to enforce that in the same way as any other copyright infringement. We do have a guide to enforcement up on our website, and either somebody will drop it in the chat or I will shortly, but we do have a guide and what to do if you find that your CC licensed material is infringed. A lot of this happens kind of just by people who are a little bit ignorant about a CC license and what it means, and will often comply if asked. We do provide suggested attribution forms, and I do think that an author providing a suggested attribution string is very helpful to both to let people know that they do need to attribute and to let people know how they should do that. Is the license meaningless if we can't afford to defend it? It's sort of the same position you're in if you have any kind of copyright and you are not in a position to defend it. I would say it's not meaningless. The CC license does give a signal about the way you would like your work to be used, even if you cannot enforce it in the way that you would like to. But if you are in a position where you do need to assert your rights because somebody is misusing the material, like unfortunately, it does come down to your ability to defend that in with the legal process.
Thank you, Kat. There are a few more questions around attribution. One is, does the use of AI without attribution for commercial purposes have a bearing on the Signals initiative? So is a CC BY ND license wouldn't prevent this?
Yeah, not sure if anybody else wants to jump in on that one, but the Signals initiative is intended to be like not a copyright license, but more of a standard that we hope all the players in the industry will abide by, perhaps even voluntarily, in order to avoid more regulation, to avoid more effects, because people are afraid of their work being misused or don't like the way that their work is misused. But it doesn't interact with or it doesn't override the licenses. The ND license would not prevent the uses that we hope that the Signals will regulate. The Signals are intended to be a voluntary initiative, which may also fall under an opt-out in the EU context, not in other jurisdictions, but in the EU context, that may be considered a machine-readable opt-out to prevent it being used from trading. That would be separate from the licensed works.
Thanks, Kat. We have a question around ways to demonstrate the value of the academic data if no attribution is given, and that traditionally paper citations are a metric that's being used, but what could it be replaced by? I think some of the question is perhaps beyond the scope of the webinar, but I think it's really helpful to reiterate that in the academic world, as Taylor mentioned, I mean, attribution is part of the academic culture. And so it is, these are the norms that are sort of enforced regardless of what the copyright says. But are there any, Melissa, would you like to take that on?
Well, just to add where we're talking data here, talking about data citation and the data that underpins the literature that is kind of an output. So that's what Europe PMC does. We have traditional text and data mining dictionary that we're using to pull out from the full text that we have data citations. So that helps build that bigger picture and connect the data to the literature, which again is helping from a kind of more holistic view of people's output. But again, without them being open and available content, we can't do that text and data mining, and we can't provide the context. And also we're working, I think I mentioned, talking with others about ways that we can convert this to a machine learning algorithm which will enable us to find many more data sets and make these connections further. But again, that's AI, but it's for the benefit of people. So if your content is mentioning lots of data sets, we need all of this data, as in the articles, to help build these algorithms, which will then circle back around and help you by showing your impact further.
Thanks, Melissa. There's been a question around Creative Commons licenses for individual objects versus a provider's overarching database right, and whether anyone can speak to that.
Is this similar to the Europe PMC license maybe that we got asked earlier?
Possibly. So there was a separate question submitted prior, and that was kind of how Creative Commons license overlaps with a license used within the Europe PMC open access subset. I mean, again, if you've asked this question and you'd like to clarify it, please do. But I can pass on. So I can perhaps speak a little bit to that, but I also pass on to Melissa for any further clarifications. Basically, so for Europe PMC, we provide access to a subset of publications that have a Creative Commons license or similar. All of the publications within the subset may have different licenses. There may be CC0 or other public domain licensed publications, or there may be some that prevent commercial use or derivatives. but all of them are packaged in a single file, and people can access, users can directly access them through the bulk downloads. It is the task rests with the user to check what license is there for each individual object and to comply with the corresponding laws, basically. But the idea is that because the licenses sort of permit similar reuse examples, we make these publications openly available. I hope that answers in the direction, but please do clarify if there's more that you'd like to know specifically. There's been a question. I think we can perhaps only ask one more, just looking at the time. Any quick remarks? Let me also check another chat. Yeah. Is there, perhaps maybe very quickly, some of the main differences between EU and US approaches to this, Kat, if you can perhaps highlight.
I think the main difference is that EU law is a little bit more prescriptive in what is considered under exceptions. Like often it's more specific about like non-commercial usage or things that fall under like a text and data mining exception. It's a little easier to know. The US has the fair use framework with a set of principles, and like how a court can interpret that can be a little bit up in the air until it actually goes before a court. But we've had some recent litigation that has seemed to indicate that AI training is considered fair use under those. So I'd say like EU, you have a little bit more guidance from the law itself, and US law is a little bit looser, but litigation is going to clarify that.
Thank you. All right, we're almost at the end of the hour. We'll stop here, but I will make sure that we save remaining questions if there are any that we can answer. We will follow up after the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a big thank you to all of our speakers. A reminder that the webinar itself will be recorded, and we'll share the link to the recording as soon as it's available, but also an encouragement to join the open office hours with Creative Commons if you have any unanswered questions that you'd like to ask them directly. It's been a blast, and we hope to see you at another event. All the best, everyone, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.